Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monica Corda. I'm the Director of Business Development at the Tech Collective, and we're thrilled to have you here today for Dodging the Pitfalls of Data Failure. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are the IT Association for the state of Rhode Island, and we provide all sorts of trainings as well as informative sessions such as this one today. So we're thrilled to have Rob Ulmschneider and Julie Blackburn here today. They are fabulous, and I think this is going to be like a dynamic duo presentation. It's chock full. They've given themselves 30 minutes, so I am not going to hold your time any longer, and I'm going to hand over the reins. Thank you both.
And this is a topic I think we could talk about even beyond 30 minutes, and I think Julie and I have talked about this in aggregate for a longer time. It's something that, Julie and I both being professionals in the data space, we can't really include this type of conversation in our marketing materials, right? Because it's not exactly what we want to lead with, but it's a very important thing to get to the bottom of. If you saw the description of the presentation, we linked to a number of studies. There's been about half a dozen studies over the last couple of years, surveys about what the failure rate is in big data and analytics projects, and the numbers are staggering. I mean, it's anywhere from 70 to 90%. So when you look at 70% failure as an optimistic number, that indicates that there's a real problem. So what we're going to talk about today is, what causes those, what are some of the main issues that we see that lead projects to be less successful than we'd like to see them be, and what we can do to avoid them. So I'm going to have Julie talk a little bit about, just to give some foundational knowledge, sort of the current state of affairs in data and industry.
Right. And I love how you frame that of, we don't like to talk about this, when we're trying to land the client or land the gig, because, the truth is the odds are not in our favor to have a successful project, but we're hoping to kind of walk you through how to make a successful project happen by, finding those pitfalls, and we're going to tell you how to try to leap over them or dodge them or stick your head in the sand, not stick your head in the sand. But yeah, basically, in the link for this, they had some really good status where Venture beat in July of 2019, 87% fail. June 2019, New Venture says 77% fail. And Gartner even says in that same time frame that 80% fail. And this is something from the New Vantage survey for AI and big data analytics. And then there was a follow-up done by the Harvard Business Review, where they summoned together, it was 64 CEOs from very large companies, Johnson & Johnson, Schneider, CVS was in there too, American Express, local companies for a lot of our Rhode Islanders, but also big companies, smart people. And what they were finding was in that summit, it wasn't through lack of talent, it wasn't through lack of good ideas and task forces. It certainly wasn't from lack of money and spending. These projects just were not reaching a success, and they were really failing to form a data-driven culture. So that's how I'll frame that. Rob, next slide, please, and I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Rob, what issues do you really see? And we've talked about this ad nauseum, you and I. What issues do you encounter in your typical project kickoff or your discovery sessions?
Yeah, well, I really think it starts before that. And it starts with the messaging that we put out there and the expectation that it sets. I think when we talk about data and as data evangelists, we talk about the really cool stuff that the Amazons and the Netflixes are doing. And I think of Bernard Marr, who, he writes a lot of books, and he puts out these anthologies every once in a while, 25 really cool big data and AI projects that, Fortune 500 companies are doing. And so you take that sort of expectation and that, hey, really cool, wow, innovative stuff that you can do with data, and then you bring it to a small and medium business where they're having trouble just with their data quality. They haven't even taken that foundation level step of cleaning their data, making sure it's consistent, making sure it's complete. And that's where we really have to start. That's not to say that we can get into the really cool stuff, but it takes time. So, we have to set that expectation. There's often, impatience. You've got a burning question. You want the answer to it right away. But if the data is not ready to answer it, we have some sort of remedial work to do. And so I think that causes some cognitive dissonance, because we have to talk about the cool stuff. but we also have to temper those expectations and say, well, here's where you need to start in order to get there. And I think one of the other things, and this happens especially once we get into the project, we start talking in kickoffs and discoveries. Are you really asking the right questions, right? Are you asking, again, going back to, are you asking questions that your data can answer? And that's often one of the first things that you really need to solve. So companies are asking, am I going after the right targets? Who are my most valuable customers? But we really have to start with, do we have the data to answer those questions? And that sort of goes into this next slide here. I think of this as a decision tree, right? We start with, do we have the data? And if the answer is no, well, how are we going to acquire that? Are we going to go to outside sources to enrich the data that we have? Do we have the data, but it's not in the right format? Is it just something that we don't have access to? And so that's another series of questions, right? Maybe we have the data, it's not clean, consistent, or complete. Maybe we have it in an application that doesn't have an API that's easy to work with. And so I think there's a series of questions, and if you can answer yes to all of these questions, you're in great shape. If any of them are no, that doesn't mean we can't do it. It just means that we're going to need to build that time into the process to really explore how we're going to do that. And, the last thing I'll say on this point, and I know, Julie, you've experienced this as well, we go to these kickoffs sometimes, and the first thing that we hear from the client is, I think my data's clean, or I know my data's clean. And, that's just not always the case. Or again, it might be, it's just not structured in the right way, and we still need to do some transformation in order to prepare it for analysis. So, we have to trust but verify, and we have to build some time into the timeline in order to be able to account for that.
Right, absolutely. No, I know as data practitioners, the majority of your time, it isn't actually spent doing the modeling, doing the hypothesis testing, it's the cleaning. And that's okay. But that can be very hard for a client or a business to accept, as it's like, well, what are you doing? Because they want to see a result. They want that visualization right off the bat. And it's sort of like, we can't get there until the data is clean enough and pristine enough, and we have access so that we can replicate what we're doing over and over again consistently. So I completely agree. Yeah, and it's a lot about asking the right questions too. I always, even in meetings, I'll steal the Neil deGrasse Tyson quote of, it's like you're asking, what kind of cheese is the moon made of? And it's sort of like, and you're sitting there like, the moon isn't made of cheese, but that's the answer. The CEO likes cheese, and he wants to know what kind of cheese is the moon made of. And it's sort of like, well, what am I going to do to prove, that question is a fallacy before we can even begin? And that's kind of a absurd question, to set off the pace of, when I can do that in a presentation, it lets them, have a giggle and take a step back, because Neil deGrasse Tyson is a much better speaker than I am, so I'll steal it every time. Yeah.
That just reminds me of something that I saw on social media earlier I think I saw it on LinkedIn earlier this week. It was a twist on the old saw that we've all heard, but it said, 80% of our efforts are done, are devoted to data cleanup, and the last 20 is complaining about data cleanup. And somebody actually responded to that saying, well, yeah, but we can automate the complaining.
That's awesome. That's really good. I'll steal that one too.
So, Julie, this is something that I wanted to ask you first and foremost. I mean, what are some of the missing elements that you see when you're walking into these projects that present the biggest challenges for you?
Right. What I created this Venn diagram because basically we have the statistics, and if we're good little data evangelists, we also have the computer science too. That's what makes us the unicorns. But we don't always have the domain knowledge, because you walk into a company, the truth is they know their organization better than you. They always will. Or they've had decades of healthcare, if you end up in kind of the Blackburn Labs realm, the bioinformatics space that no one can really catch up with, where that is your bread and butter. You are breathing it, living it every single day. So it's really important to make sure that you are put in a position to be empowered by getting that domain knowledge and having that hands-on meeting and those face-to-face conversations with the domain leaders, with the people actually handling and wrangling the data every day, because they may not be data scientists, but they're in the mud. They're in the mud with us. And that is really important, to be empowered to do that. And then, when we're talking about tools, it can be a situation of, let's say we're talking about bioinformatics. It's like, okay, if I have a string of data with a lot of variance, and it has, there's a long control there, then I can use something like split threader. But if it's short, then we're going to have to go back to IGB. And people will sometimes want that sexy new visualization tool because it looks fabulous, and they're sick of the old tool. But the truth is, it's not necessarily the right thing. And a lot of times that person who's sitting there in the mud already knows that, but they need somebody. And I'll say to a lot of these individual practitioners, I'll be the villain for you, because they hired me to come in and, crack some skulls and be that silver bullet. I'll be the villain. And when you can have them open up that way, then you can be so empowered to do things with them as a partnership.
Yeah. I think this is something that we're going to come back to a lot, but when you're building the project team, it's so important to have it be a cross-functional team with representatives from all areas of the organization that interact with data, and from all levels too. You need leadership there, of course. You need middle management, and you need the people that are using it every day. You need people on the IT side. You need, if they have internal data analysts, a lot of times the companies that I go into don't. That's why I'm there. But you do need people on the IT side, and you need the business users. And oftentimes, you're right, they're not talking to one another to begin with. Sales isn't talking to IT, and that's why what they're putting into place isn't driving results.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's what we're talking about with the communication issues, and the more people you involve with the team, then you can get that confounding nature of communication complexity, which I've talked about in other presentations as well. But it could be a situation of, oh, well, Debbie touched that at one point, let's have her in the meeting too. And then it ends up being too many people. So it's important to have the people involved that you need to, but also to carve out, not just have everybody in the entire company involved too. We have a business side, a tech side, a statistics side, your special domain knowledge, and they need to shine in each of their fields and try not to step on the toes of everybody else at the same time. I think that later in this presentation, we're going to talk about the project planning and project management tools that you and I like. I'm also a certified Scrum Master. So I will say where I really wanted to hit with this, one of the most important things with communication issues is communicating uncertainty. And it can be something that data scientists are afraid to do. There is always going to be a level of uncertainty. There is no crystal ball. We love to say that we can tip the odds in your favor, but the truth is there is no crystal ball. Like, for example, could anybody, I use this example a lot, have predicted Chewbacca mom? That's the mom who went on YouTube and she put on the Chewbacca mask and was laughing her butt off. And that mask sold like crazy. Now, you might have been able to see those YouTube video, movements were really increasing really fast, but would it have been enough time to handle the production costs and the shipping cost and making that all happen at the same time? I don't think anybody could have predicted that there was going to be a mom who put on that Chewbacca mask and was laughing her butt off, and that went so viral, right? So there's always uncertainty. You can watch your trends. And I always say, because again, it's more bioinformatics. It's like we look at the volume, the variety, and the velocity. Think of it as, how quick is that cancer growing, right? How big is that tumor? What kind of tumor is it, right? Or if you're like me with, MS, it's like, how aggressively is your own immune system chewing up your myelin? Where is it? You know what I mean? So it can be the same thing with manufacturing. You know what I mean? Are those toys flying off the shelves? What is the velocity of that turn, right? So again, and you have to communicate the uncertainty with all those aspects. Okay, I think that we can move on to the next slide.
I have a question that you kind of brought to mind, but we talk about uncertainty, in a very like a decision-making context, but even in the traditional data science context, like, how do you communicate confidence intervals to an audience that doesn't understand that? And how do you say, hey, this is my data model, and here is the likelihood that the answer is between these bars? How do you put that into a digestible form for the business leader that just wants an answer?
I usually use a story. I tell it in the form of a story because that's just a way that people can digest it easily. And then I will have them share the story back. Because if they can't repeat it simply, they don't really understand it. That's actually, there's a perfect Einstein quote And of course, I don't have it ready, right? But it's basically if somebody can't answer something simply, then they don't understand it.
Yeah,
So
I love
yeah,
that.
that is, yeah, and that's what it is. So I always, to make sure that they get it, I'm like, so then can you share a story with me about how, you had this interval where it was like this, and it seemed like a short thing, but, here's the confidence interval. No, that it is difficult to do. It will always be a challenge, but I find if you can use a story, where now, of course, I'm pressed to not think of sharing one that would be embarrassing for somebody. You know what I mean? Where you say, okay, this is the space that we have, and you have different personality types too. Usually your CEOs, there'll be that strong D personality if you do that DISC profile. And the best way to talk to a D personality, in my experience, is to say, I'm not telling you what to do, and then proceed to tell them what to do. Yeah, I know that sounds crazy, but you actually have to frame it that way. I'm not telling you what to do, but if I were talking to my brother or my uncle or my sister or however it would be appropriate, I would advise this, right? And then it kind of breaks down and lets them trust you that little bit more. But yeah, how have you found it to be? Do you have an awesome story to share with me about how?
I really don't, and that's why I asked. Usually
you were looking for ideas. We all are. Yeah.
Usually I try to, start to explain what confidence interval is and how you interpret that. I just read the room and see if I'm explaining it at the right level. But, I think more than anything, I will say this. The people that I've worked with by and large, and that I've worked for, they want the results. They want my opinion on the results. They trust my opinion on the results. That's why they've brought me on. And they know that the underlying work is there if they want to see it, for sure. But they're not necessarily interested. It's not like presenting a research project where, I state my methods and I say, this is the model that we use. What they really want is one visualization and me to explain what I think that means so that it can inform their decision.
Right. No, that is true. And I've so been there. Yeah, no, I completely get that. It kind of is what it is. We've discussed in our data literacy committee, and I know we've all heard me tell this tale so many times, but maybe not to this audience. I was taking over for a person once who was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. But when he was in meetings, he would have lines of Linux flying across the big screen and say, "Oh, that's what I found." And then like, what does that mean? And that was because he just didn't have that psychological safety to say, "I found this, and the truth is, it doesn't say anything." Or, "I found this, and the truth is, the confidence interval ain't that great, guys." You know what I mean? And to me, that was kind of like, managers, shame on you for not making him feel that he was in a team where sometimes he failed. You know what I mean? Sometimes, well, I shouldn't say he failed, but that the result wasn't what you were looking for. And that can be okay. You know what I mean? That's kind of what you have to do in business, is fail forward. Go ahead.
I think one of the things that, as my data career was starting out, I was really, my instinct was to just give you all the information because I know that that's what I would want, right? I'm gonna write an analysis with all the detailed tables of the data in addition to vizzes, and I'm not even going to give you an executive summary because I don't know how to summarize this. This is all good information. And I got, people, might have given me, good feedback on that, but I noticed that it wasn't driving decision making because they couldn't really grasp it. I learned very quickly, executive summaries are my friend, and I need to just crystallize the very important points that I want to make sure get across.
Yeah, I think that every data scientist and data evangelist should do a quick study on data journalism, which is where I got a lot of the inspiration for my data as a narrative presentation, because it really is just like, give them the high points, hook them, pull up the feels. You know what I mean? Make them feel like there is something they can make a decision with here. And you got to start with the low hanging fruit. Give them a couple wins right away. Right? That low hanging fruit before we get really into the good, sexy stuff that you and I like, you know what I mean, for the more interesting data acrobatics. But there's nothing wrong with low hanging fruit.
So, Julie, you introduced this quote to me, and I really like it. I'll let you, go ahead and talk about what this means to you.
Oh, okay. I'm going to read the full context of the quote, and we're getting a little short on time. But basically, I'm going to move my monitor a little like that so I can do it. Implementing AI into the business requires experimentation and an understanding that not every experiment is going to drive ROI. When an AI project is successful, it is often built on top of many failed data science experiments. Taking a portfolio approach to ML and AI enables greater longevity in projects and the ability to build on successes more effectively in the future. What a great quote. And I'm sorry I didn't get a picture of this gentleman. That's what he had on LinkedIn, which is public, so I could use it. Right? But that is exactly what you and I were just talking about a moment ago, where you're kind of failing your way forward, you know what I mean? And as you're eliminating variables, as you're eliminating potential pitfalls, and options where the data can be staring you down a lot of rabbit holes, that's okay. It's all towards you're figuring it out piece by piece and just carving out those flaws and saying, no, that didn't lead us in the right direction, next. And that's really when you want to get to the real ML and the real AI. And it's like, what's the difference between ML and AI? It's like the difference between a still picture and a movie. You know what I mean? So to get there, I think that there is always a process. And you and I have discussed several times, Rob, where it's not a ladder. It's not point A to point B. It's a loop.
Right. And I think the practical advice that flows from this quote is there are going to be many failed data science experiments. If you're doing a project that has a clear outcome, you just need to build in time for that. And you need to build in expectation that this is indeed an experiment. And so we're going to try something and then it might fail. And then we're going to try something and that might fail. We're going to get to the bottom line, right? We're going to get to where we need to go. I think it just goes back to the beginning. We can do amazing things given enough time.
Absolutely.
But if we're looking to turn something around in 1 to 2 months, and it's a project that really needs a lot more bandwidth than that, we're going to have to reconsider what we're actually delivering. That doesn't mean to say that we can't deliver real value in 1 to 2 months. In fact, I often look for that. But we have to, redefine what that deliverable is. And I know we have a slide on Agile coming up, but that's a big part of the Agile methodology too, is incremental delivery so that you're adding real value and iterating on it.
I wanted to ask you, because I know you've run into this. Can you tell us about the idea of chasing technology and how that can lead us down those rabbit holes?
Yeah, well, I think of let's see what I know we're short on time. I'm trying to tell this quickly. So I think the concept of bike shedding, and if you're not familiar with it, the original allegory is imagine this committee that's tasked with developing the property on a nuclear power plant site. And they've got 2 items on their agenda for this meeting. And the first is the nuclear reactor itself. So the nuclear engineer gets up and he talks for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, really highly specific technical nuclear engineering stuff. And the rest of the committee just looks around and says, oh, yep, that sounds good. And then they spend the last 45 minutes of that meeting talking about what color they're going to paint the bike shed that's also going to be on it. And it's because this is how conversations, we talk about the most trivial stuff sometimes in these conversations because it's something that everyone can participate in. And I think everybody has an opinion on Tableau and Power BI. And in the data science community, among practitioners, we have opinions on R versus Python. But that's really not as important as the models that you're building and the results that you're driving and the total data ecosystem that sits around these applications. Because all the things that we described, they have their place. They're all great tools. But you can't just spin up Tableau and you're all set and ready to have self-service analytics. There needs to be thought given into the data that's coming into that platform.
Absolutely. Okay. Good. I'm going to try to, if you would then like to talk a little bit about enterprise data literacy, right? Yeah. And, your citizen analysts. I want to talk about that Passover, and I'm going to kick it to you to make sure you're very well versed in this one. I want you to be able to shine.
So this is an important thing not to neglect, and it's not just a matter of training, although that is important. You know, if you're deploying the Power BI, let's say, you know, you need to make sure that everybody that's going to be using it is trained on how to use Power BI. But it's also, you know, if these are people that are going to be, you know, I use the term citizen analyst because you think of citizen scientists, it's sort of the same thing. With self-service analytics, you have the actual business users that are drilling into data, that are summarizing and are making decisions without having to run to the analyst anymore. You know, I'm old enough to remember a time where you wanted a new report, you had to come ask me or someone else on my team, and it got put in the pipeline, and 3 months later when you had it, well, that question's no longer relevant. So now with the beauty of Tableau, Power BI, and applications of that nature is we put this in the hands of the business user, and 9 times out of 10, they can get that answer right away. But now that we're doing that, you know, we've lost control of the narrative. We're not doing the storytelling anymore. They have to do their own storytelling. So, you know, do they know how to read the graphs that that they're putting together? And I'm not saying this to be condescending. You know, it's just a basic sort of data literacy I think is required in the workforce now that is akin to 20 years ago when Excel was required in the workforce. You know, it's a basic skill that you need to be able to master. And so as part of this, you know, you need to be able to be confident that your end users are going to use the data to make the right decisions.
Very good. I do see that we're kind of at the time. I'll just say I'm a certified Scrum Master. I have a blog post about this on the Blackburn Labs website. Start with the end in mind and let everybody have visibility. That's really what this is about when we're talking about planning. So you have to plan, but kind of not too much because you want to have the ability to be nimble and pivot. I do think that factor that isn't considered in all those statistics we were looking at in the beginning for data project failure. Those companies are all behemoths, and you need to be a little nimble. Make sure that you can talk to your team. We always do things this way in our company where it's your code, your IP, your process. We're going to let you see every step of the way. But it's so critical to have that question in the beginning that you're answering. So I think we've covered that. We can go on, right? And I just love this quote. And I found this woman on LinkedIn. And of course, I admire her. She's the CTO of data science for AI at IBM. So I guess she's a pretty smart cookie. And she says, AI is not going to replace managers, but managers who use AI are going to replace those who don't. And it's interesting. She had this on her LinkedIn and I had to snatch it. It's actually a post from the Wall Street Journal about, you know, people who are ordering clothes on companies like Walmart.com. Size is wrong. All those quarantinis caught up with them. People got a little chubby during the COVID, right? So if you're looking at those return rates, if you're really looking at that order processing, you know, and using those analytics smartly, that's the kind of stuff that we hope to be able to anticipate. But again, you know, I don't want to spend too much time on that because I know Rob has a couple of great points for the end. That's my question for you on this one. Oh yeah, well, it's actually just a question right here. You see a team, you know, come together, project reasonable conclusion. Sometimes it still falls through the cracks. Why do you think so, Rob?
So this is a great place to end because we're talking about theoretically the end of the project, but I don't really believe in that. You know, I believe in milestones. This is, you know, I know we touched on Agile really briefly, but this is why it's so important. Needs are going to change. And it's, you know, Julie, you and I both also have some experience in app development. And with that, I think that the end is more easier to define, right? Because you're trying to solve a specific problem. With this, it's you're answering questions that are going to bring up other questions, and those questions are going to bring up other questions, and new business context is going to make those questions irrelevant, and now new questions will arise. And so you need to have structure in place that not just at the end of the project you say, yay, we were successful, but you need to have structure in place that ensures that that momentum is maintained. So, you know, you might have heard of having a BI center of excellence or a data center of excellence. It's sort of like a steering committee for how your organization uses data. And their function should be to make sure that everybody does have that base level of data literacy, that they're getting the most out of the application, that they're entering data consistently. If you have a data governance framework, are we following it? Keeping an eye out for system conversions and upgrades. How is that going to affect the data that's flowing into a data lake or a data warehouse or into these BI platforms, that all needs to be considered long term, and that doesn't ever end. So there's no point where you just sit back and say, we're done with the data. We're done with the data. It's ongoing. It's a cycle, and you just need to be mindful of that. It's not a problem. It's not a bad thing. But if you're looking for an endpoint, you're going to be disappointed.
Right. No, I think so much of what we do is just asking the questions, and that's what I love, to sit with that user and be like, what's that? And I could just be pointing to a SKU like, what's that one so different? What's going on there? And they'll be like, well, you know what? It's because that department didn't talk to that department. We just never fixed it. It's like, okay, making a note, But I love your point of making like a task force, like a team that keeps asking questions and tossing out old ones and putting in new ones. That I think is a wonderful suggestion for making sure that you have ongoing success. Yeah.
So Julie, some final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I think we kind of slayed it, Rob. I think we slayed it. But yeah, you have to manage expectations, ask the right questions. That's a big issue in the beginning, and keep drilling in and carving out till you get to the truth. Something I threw in there is I like to share the win. I guess that's part of the whole agile methodology. If we failed, I say it's me who failed. But if we succeed, the whole team succeeded. And I always make sure that even as I'm asking the questions from people, I am not here to uncover some horrible truth that you just ignored. A lot of times you knew it was there, but you didn't have an access point to address it. And I'm here to help you with that. And if there's some bad news, I'll be the villain. So that's what I like to do, and to think of it that way. Yeah.
So I know we're a little bit over time here, but if there are any questions that came in, I don't know if Monica, if you've been monitoring that, you can.
Yes, you do have a question. What tactics have you used to get management on board with a data science project?
Julie, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. Basically, something you can do is, you really just have to focus on what they are looking for their ROI, and be actually interested in their success is what I use. And, again, always that power of the storytelling. One pitfall that I often run into when trying to get managers invested is they say like, oh, if they're faced with somebody like a Rob or a me, it's like we're kind of those magical unicorns. It's like they can actually speak so that I understand, right? And they can code and they can do all sorts of stuff. I can use them for all sorts of things. But, you shouldn't use your unicorn to do pack mule work, And I'm not saying that the pack mule work is invalid or necessary, because it is. But, use that specialist for what that specialist is for, and just make them know that we are here to be your silver bullet. We are here to empower you to get what you want. And it may take a few passes, and that's okay. We're going to stick with you.
Yeah, I think that, any business leader is interested in the bottom line. And if you can demonstrate the ROI, either in dollars, in efficiency, in some way. And I mean, who better to demonstrate the ROI of a project than some data analysts or data scientists, right?
Right.
We really need to, make sure that we're demonstrating at the outset what we project to be the real value that we're going to deliver from any engagement that we're doing. And, as long as you've done that and you've set those expectations, even if the expectations might be somewhat disappointing, it's better to be honest up front, than to disappoint later on. They say under promise, over deliver. They say that because it's true.
Yes. I do not see any other questions in the chat. I did post, if people would just take a moment, we put a 1-question survey out just to kind of get a feel for, did our presenters meet the mark of what you expected for today? Kind of, do we want to see them back? I know I would love another hour just to hear them. And Julie, I loved the line of, I'm not going to tell you what to do and then tell them what to do. I may use that for some management skills of my own. But this was wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah. I pledge to you, it works.
I know Creosa posted the link to your blog, Julie. So that's in the chat as well. And if you give us a couple of days, we will have this up on our YouTube channel for those of you who want to share it or just maybe watch it again so you can really take in all the information at a calmer, slower pace. So, but thank you both, and thank you all for attending today. We look forward to seeing you at future Tech Collective events.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.